Welcome to In the Desert of Set, a pagan and occult website by G.B. Marion. I'm G.B. Marion. I write about life as a polytheist in contemporary times with random, long-winded detours into ancient history, classic horror movies, and all kinds of other fun stuff. Won't you join me for today's adventure? If you'd like to read a free electronic print copy of the following recording, please visit desertofset.com. What are you afraid of? It's only rock and roll. One of my all-time favorite movies is a flick that hardly anyone seems to know about. You have to be a real 1980s horror nerd to have seen Charles Martin Smith's Trick or Treat from 1986, and it probably helps if you're a metalhead too. I've never once seen the flick listed on anyone's top 10 favorite movies list, but you will certainly find it on mine, and I'll tell you why. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first film ever made that features a plot inspired entirely by heavy metal and the hatred it received from politicians, televangelists, and self-righteous soccer moms during the 1980s satanic panic. It may not necessarily be the best film of its subgenre. Undoubtedly, many people would probably vote for Jason Lee Howden's Deathgasm from 2015, which has a very similar plot. But despite Deathgasm's superior production values, Trick or Treat did it first, and it made a huge impression on me while I was growing up. Eddie Weinbauer, played by Mark Price, better known as Skippy from Family Ties, is a teenage metalhead who lives in the town of Lake Ridge, North Carolina, and who goes by the nickname Ragman. Eddie is especially dedicated to the music of Sammy Kerr, played by Tony Fields, a glam metal shock rocker who's obviously inspired by Alice Cooper. Eddie absolutely worships Sammy, and he's friends with a radio DJ named Nuke, who's played by Gene Simmons of Kiss, as well as a nerd named Roger, played by Glenn Morgan, one of the lead writers for the X-Files and the Final Destination movies, and a girl at his school named Leslie, played by Lisa Orgolini. Unfortunately, Ragman is also bullied at his school by a bunch of jocks, led by Doug Savant of Desperate Housewives fame, who all think he's creepy and weird. These guys are pretty harsh, too, because they apparently see nothing wrong with trying to drown poor Eddie in a swimming pool. Why does Ragman dig Sammy Kerr so much? Because Kerr's music helps him cope with his feelings of subjugation. In a strange way, Kerr is eerily prophetic of Marilyn Manson, who took shock rock to a whole new level in the 1990s. Not content with just scaring or pissing off parents, Manson made himself into a full-blown culture war iconoclast, the so-called Antichrist superstar, and deliberately terrorized the entire American religious right. In a similar way, Kerr uses his music and his fan base to declare war on society. He offers his fans a future in which rock's chosen warriors will rule the apocalypse. And he promises all who try to ban his music that we will bring you down. For Eddie, Kerr is more than just a rock icon or a hero. He's a countercultural messiah who promises total emancipation from Christian society. But all of this seems to vanish into thin air when Eddie turns on the TV one morning to learn that Sammy Kerr has died in a hotel fire. The boy is instantly crushed and descends into despair. But when he visits his friend Nuke at the local WZLP radio station, Nuke gives him a special gift. You see, Sammy Kerr actually grew up right here in Eddie's hometown, and Nuke was friends with him when they were kids. As it turns out, Nuke just happens to have a demo recording of an album Kerr was still recording when he died. The album is named Songs in the Key of Death. Nuke gives the record to Eddie, telling him Sammy would have wanted him to have it. And while listening to it later that night, Eddie discovers the album contains a bunch of backmasked messages. Then he plays the record in reverse to see what the messages are saying, and that's when he receives the biggest shock of his life. The voice of Sammy Kerr speaks to Eddie through the backmasked messages, telling the boy to do certain things while he's at school the next day. When Eddie follows the advice he is given, he outsmarts his foes and gets them in trouble, while getting away scotch-free himself. It then seems like the two conspirators will get to realize their shared vision of a world without bullies after all. But as Kerr continues to help Ragman nail his tormentors, he also demands the boys' help in nailing everyone who ever tried to ban his music. Their Halloween pranks soon turn deadly, and Ragman realizes his beloved demigod is actually a demon. By the end, Eddie must stop Sammy from killing everyone in Lake Ridge when Nuke plays songs in the key of death backwards on his radio show on All Hallows Eve, no less. Now I know good and well what some of you must be thinking. Trick or Treat sounds like something that was made by evangelical Christians, right? It sounds like the entire point of this film is to demonize heavy metal and anyone who listens to it. As a devoted metalhead myself, I probably shouldn't enjoy this film at all, should I? But consider the fact that Ozzy Osbourne appears in a cameo as the Reverend Aaron Gilstrom, an anti-rock televangelist. Yes, you heard that correctly. Ozzy fucking Osbourne plays a Jimmy Swaggart clone who preaches that metal musicians are all Satanists brainwashing our kids. Now that's what I call irony. I might also point out that Trick or Treat doesn't quite end the way you'd expect. If this were an evangelical propaganda film like Rock, It's Your Decision from 1982, Eddie would swear off metal for good after defeating Sammy Kerr and give himself to Jesus, as they say. But after he defeats the ghost of the man who used to be his hero, what do you suppose Ragman actually does? By gods, he plays a goddamn Sammy Kerr record. Yes, that's right. And I think this is where Trick or Treat really shines the most. While the film is inspired by urban American myths about backmasking in heavy metal music, it obviously does not agree with the people who take such fears literally. Instead, the film presents metal as something that's legitimately fun, but misunderstood, and not only by parents, preachers, or politicians. Eddie Weinbauer eventually sees that Sammy Kerr is a much worse bully than any of the jocks who've been tormenting him at Lake Ridge High. But when Eddie takes Sammy down, he isn't turning his back on metal, or even on Kerr's music necessarily. He's just learning to separate the art he loves from the artist who created it. The artist might be a major asshole, but it's okay to still enjoy and take inspiration from their art. When I was in high school, I used to worship the ground Marilyn Manson walked on. But then I learned he really isn't the all-powerful Antichrist superstar he made himself out to be. At first, this made me feel like I could never listen to Manson's music again. My sense of disappointment was just too much. But after a while, I learned that art can still be deeply meaningful and magical, even if the person who created it is not who or what I want them to be. I went through this exact same process with Alice Cooper and Ozzy Osbourne. In heavy metal especially, it's easy to confuse the people creating the music with the characters they play on stage. Marilyn, Alice, and Ozzy aren't real people. They're bigger-than-life personas that were created by Brian Warner, Vincent Furnier, and John Osborne, respectively. The funny thing is, once I finally began to understand this principle, I started to enjoy their music even more. In Trick or Treat, the problem is not with heavy metal itself, but with the fact that Sammy Kerr takes his hype and his stage persona way too seriously. When Eddie fights him, Sammy accuses him of being false metal. But in reality, Sammy is the one who is false. Part of the fun to heavy metal is that it's basically a huge power fantasy that can be taken to some truly ridiculous extremes. What's more, this is usually done while keeping one's tongue planted firmly in cheek. Sure, there are people like Sammy Kerr who take themselves way too seriously, but this genre was built on the backs of guys like Coop and Ozzy, who sing about strangling people or having sex with the devil while winking at their audiences. It's all make-believe, much like a Halloween party that never ends, and the people who take it too seriously, including both the Pat Robertsons and the Varg Vikernases of this world, are completely missing the point. Most people who've seen Trick or Treat will tell you it's a total dud. To be fair, it is full of bloopers. You can even see the boom mic at the top of the screen at one point. Keep your eyes peeled when Ragman answers the front door, only to find his mom's boyfriend dressed up as Rambo on the other side. Pay close attention to the top right-hand corner of the screen. The movie also can't seem to settle on whether it wants to be a genuine horror film or a comedy with horrific overtones, which is something that normally tends to annoy me. But even with all that being said, Trick or Treat is very well acted, the music is phenomenal, featuring songs by Fastway and a score by Christopher Young, and a great deal of creative effort was clearly put into it. They weren't just trying to make a quick buck with this one. They were actually trying to make something witty and intelligent, and for my money at least, they succeeded. Trick or Treat is also a film that we hold sacred in the LV-426 tradition, much like 1979's Alien and 1982's The Thing. It nicely reflects our own personal histories with Set. We were all like Eddie Weinbauer when we were kids. We were alienated youth, and we coped with our problems by listening to angry, aggressive-sounding music. That same music became one of our various doorways into Setianism, and for this reason, we treated our rock heroes like they were pillars of wisdom and virtue. Big Red had to disabuse us of this notion over time. Like Ragman, we had to learn how to enjoy our favorite artists without believing in all their hype. And Trick or Treat reminds us of what it was like to go through all that. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this sermon and you'd like to read some more, please check out desertofset.com. I hope you have a wonderful day. Set bless.